Hello, everybody, and welcome to the LeanTossup Call of Duty podcast, Major 2, Week 1. Yeah, we're already past a major, and it is January 10th. Well, actually, sorry, today's January 11th, we're recording, but it's January, and we're already in Major 2. This is the earliest we've ever been to this point in the Call of Duty League season. Usually, we're not having these conversations until the Super Bowl is over, but we're gonna the Call of Duty this next couple of weeks are gonna be competing against the NFL playoffs. So yeah, I mean the thing of it is this is a new territory for us, but I'm pretty excited for it. I mean the Call of Duty last major one was really good. Yeah, I'm pretty excited. Joining me as always is co-host of the show CDLMetrics. How are you doing today, and how have you been feeling about the COD we've seen so far this year?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Excited that we're already rolling back into more matches. And yeah, it feels weird that a major is already complete and it's January 11th. Because, yeah, normally if this was last year, we'd still have, a week or two before the kickoff event. And that's not even a major, technically. So it's just good that we're already into the swing of things. I think overall, Major 1 went pretty well. New York obviously won the event. A bit of a surprise, but I mean, they just have looked so dominant. If you just take out week one with that M4 meta, like New York have been the best team in the game, so congrats to them for winning. I think the Twitch streams went pretty well outside of the delays we saw from time to time. Some big delays, but getting all that sorted out, made some sense. It was a little bit of a headache, but having four matches on at once is fun. Like you can pick and choose what you want to watch. If you just want to watch one stream, go ahead. But Twitch is obviously very nice because you can piece those streams together. So that was enjoyable just to see that we have that feature now. And yeah, the matches were great. This game is a fun watch, and I think we have a pretty competitive season ahead of us, and already a lot of moves going into Major 2 qualifiers.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the whole multiple streams going at the same time. That was really nice because it gives you the ability to like watch whichever one you want to watch. And I was kind of doing. I mean, like I think for some people it's like, oh, my favorite team is like Minnesota or Toronto or something, and like they get to watch theirs. They can either watch just that one alone or they can watch that full screen. But I think if you're listening to this podcast, I I suspect you are you're like us and you have stuff on pretty much every game except for a couple. Some of you don't have something on, which is fine, especially with some of those challenger teams. But for most of them, you have multiple bets going, and it's very similar to any given Sunday for the NFL with Red Zone. So I found myself creating a little like Red Zone channel there, and every once in a while, like when I heard I felt myself like hearing like Scott Hansen being okay, let's go check in on the Vegas Legion to see how they're doing in their hard points. So no, yeah, it was really great. I really like that, and I am very sad now that we will not have multi streaming for another whole year now. So maybe we like again, this is something the CDL needs to work on. But like what we had there, which made that major great, like that was so much COD. It was an amazing weekend, but now we won't have that for another whole year. So that's a little sad. But moving on, we now go back to our one match at any given time. We've got 10 matches this week. I think so. We're going to recap them. We're going to talk about the matches for this week, and then we're going to talk about qualifier wins, which is kind of an interesting bet that exists on Bet365. It's not on the other sports books as of yet, but Bet365 usually is one of the first to do some of these more exotic ones. Like they have kill props, they have um, the qualifier wins now. So, but generally it starts filtering to other sports books as well. So, here's to hoping that those eventually get to other sports books. But let's start off with the first match here on Friday afternoon: Toronto versus London. London, of course, has made a team change. Scraps is in for Paul X, and I believe that's it. Which is, not gonna lie, a little underwhelming. That being said, the market has not moved here very much at all. Toronto Ultra minus 1.5, minus 165. London plus 1.5, plus 125. These are Bovada prices. Um, Ultra minus 400 on the money line. London plus 260. I've got this as a pretty fair price, honestly. I've got um like I don't see a lot of value on the minus 1.5. I've got the minus 1.5 price pretty fairly, so I don't love that. But I mean, maybe there's a little bit of value on some of these some of these in-game spreads. I kind of like ultra minus the points for the hard point, and maybe let me see here. I like that. I like ultra minus the 1.5 in the search and destroy. Um, but outside of that, I don't have really many other leans inside this game. I think Toronto's a better team. I don't really think Scrap's going to particularly save this London team. But yeah, I think the minus 1.5 and the minus 2.5, they're just a little too rich for my blood. I'd rather kind of focus on some game spreads. What do you think?
Yeah, that's fair. I also side with Toronto if you are going to make a pick on this game. I just think these teams are clearly a step apart from each other. Toronto are in that, contenders tier of, one of the best teams in the game. We saw that with their finish at Major 1. London kind of crashed and burned after the M4 meta went away. Um, yeah, the Paul X decision, I'm a big fan of Paul X. You know that. I talk about him as much as I can. It sounded like he made like I don't know, the discourse on the team maybe wasn't great with him. And if you have a guy on your team who you just can't get along with, things can get a little shaky. So he put up very nice numbers as he always does. We'll see if maybe Scraps can come in, match those numbers, bring some better vibes, whatever the case may be. Either way, I don't think that roster move is going to catapult this team up into that Toronto tier of teams or even the middle of the pack. Because right now, I would say London are, you know, probably a bottom 2 or 3 team in the league, and Toronto are on the complete opposite end of that. But you're right. The minus 1.5 at minus 165 it's fair. Like I'm totally okay if you want to take that. Um, but I don't know. Being the first game back from an extended time off, I think it's more of a stay away game for me, and then I really can't see this number pushing, more in favor of London as we get closer to match time. So, yeah, overall a stay away. But if I had to make a pick, I'd side with your Toronto Ultra for sure.
Yeah, I think so. This Ultra team was really exciting, I'd say. Like
Yeah,
they came close to winning this thing. They kind of got a really bad like they lost 3-1 to Phase. But I mean, I went back and rewatched that game. They had a lead in the first hard point. Second hard point got away from them. Like they were definitely competitive and they were definitely one of the top teams in the league. And I think it's I mean, not time exactly, but it's these they should definitely be considered one of the top teams in the game. I think they're definitely top 3, top 4, depending on who else you define there. But they're definitely one of the best teams and a threat to win any major and even champs too. So yeah, this team is really good, and I think we're gonna see it coming right out of the gate here on Friday. Second match. This one's going to be a little bit interesting. Boston Breach, who had a very disappointing major and has not made any team changes. They're taking on Minnesota. Minnesota as well, no team changes, but they had an okay-ish major, but not
yeah,
underperformed expectations, but nothing too severe. Boston plus 1.5 minus 175. Minnesota minus 1.5 plus 135. Boston plus 145 on the money line. Minnesota minus 190. I like Boston here. Like the thing of it is, people say that. I think people called them on Twitter. I think we saw a couple memes calling them the Boston M4s. Which the second the M4 got banned, they did horribly. But to be fair, Awakening had some sort of issue where he couldn't. He was sick or something, and then they lost to an Elevate team that was actually pretty good. And then I think they then lost to another team, and then they went out 0-2. So that's not really particularly their fault. And I think that they had a bad week after the M4. They had a bad 2 games after the M4 was banned. I think they went 1-1 after that. So there is some fairness that maybe they're not as good with the new weapon, but I feel like eventually there'll be an adjustment phase, and once the adjustments are made, then this team will start doing a lot better. Um, so I kind of like Boston. The plus 175 is a little rich for me. I'm not the biggest fan of that. It's interesting though because although the line is like like Boston, Minnesota is clearly a favorite here and a relatively sizable favorite. Like all the map spreads are very similar. Like the hard point spread is 1.5 points. It's basically just the money line. Um, Map two, I mean, Minnesota's more favored in the search, of course, because they are a better search team. And then, but like plus 130 on the the control. Like, it's such a weird, like, when you if you were to see these lines, like looking at them, you would think that this line would be a lot more narrow, and it's not. I mean, it's plus 150 is actually a pretty sizable. Well, it's not like the most size, but it's a decently sized thing. Like, the books expect Minnesota to win this relatively handily, and the this is not completely. This doesn't seem to be the case with some of the top lines. What do you think about this? Do you think this is like a really really close game? Do you kind of like Boston here, or do you think Minnesota is going to be able to get the job done here?
Yeah, as a Rocker fan, yeah, their major one performance was a disappointment. It's kind of like what you expected at the very least, to make it out of the group, being that they were the number one seed overall. The teams in their group, didn't look that great going into the tournament. Very quickly we realized New York is maybe the best team in the game. So that was a tough matchup, but they didn't even come close to beating them in their group play. They kind of lucked out getting that Decimate Challengers team in their group because Decimate looked horrible. So that was a free win basically. And then all they had to do was beat LAG to qualify for bracket play, and I think we all consider LAG probably the worst team in the league, if not, bottom two or bottom three. So, yeah, you had to beat a challengers team that didn't belong there, and you had to beat maybe the worst team in the game, pro team, that is, to get to the bracket. And congratulations, that's what you did. Then you lose to Toronto. Couldn't really keep it that close. You get bounced down to play Vegas in the losers bracket, a Vegas team that is not like what they have been in previous years. You take that to a map five, you don't get it. It's kind of like even if you win that, what was Minnesota gonna do? They probably would have had the same fate as Vegas. So I think right now Minnesota clearly in the middle of the pack. Boston, yeah, I mean they looked really good through 1 week. Since then, it hasn't been much. You're right. Awakening did miss that last match that they played. I believe that was against Vegas to qualify for bracket play. They come up just short. Um, yeah, Boston's a weird team, man, because we were so excited for them after 1 week. We were like, okay, Awakening, like he's a big difference over TJ Halley, and that meta change happened, and it's been nothing but losses for that team, I think, since. So, or maybe they had one other qualifier win in there somewhere, but yeah, I actually do lean with you with Boston here. It's not a strong one at all. But yeah, these teams are relatively close. I do think Minnesota should be more like a minus 150 favorite than a minus 190 favorite. Um, but yeah, I think Boston can get this done, and I'm interested in control primarily. Boston have not played El Asilo control on the year. Minnesota have not played Greenberg Hotel control, which is kind of hard to believe because we see that so much. So it feels like they'll probably play on Fortress for that game three. Minnesota 2-2, Boston 1-1. Boston better, in my opinion, in their control performance on that specific map. So if they can take that control, I think they're the better hardpoint team. Like a Boston win in 4 maps wouldn't shock me here. Minnesota still not the best hardpoint team in the game. Um, so I think what a lot of people might consider a shocking Boston 3-1 could very well happen on day one here. It's the second match of the day. A lot of time to prepare for all these teams, obviously. So I do like the underdogs in that spot a little more just because of the long layoff, a much needed layoff for Boston. Um, so yeah, I think even alternatively, if you can find a Boston minus 1.5, I think there's probably a good price on that. But for me, again, like the first match, I think it's a stay away. But we'll see if this Boston number keeps trending in the right direction. Now I might take a shot on it.
Yeah, I've already grabbed some Boston money line. The plus 1.5 at minus 175. It's just it feels a little too rich for my blood. I feel like it's just like I like it, but like you're paying basically 2 to 1, or well
Yeah,
1 1 2.
for a
Like,
team that could very well win in 4 maps, and if that's the case, I would take the bigger
yeah.
payout with
Well,
the
the
minus
just
1.5.
for reference, minus 1.5 is plus 275. So that's actually kind of attractive. I kind of do like that actually.
Yeah.
I don't hate the over 4.5 too. I've got that priced at about 39.6%, and I'm seeing plus 150, which is 40%. So that's basically even on that. Um, in terms of money line, I've got Minnesota only winning this about 54% of the time, which is not minus 200. It's about
Right.
minus 110,
I'm
give or take.
I'm at
So
about, yeah, 57% or so. So we're
yeah,
pretty close there.
so that's the thing, and I don't yeah. It's hard. I like the money line. Maybe you sprinkle a little on the minus 1.5. Maybe something on the over 4.5. The problem is you can't really have over 4.5 and then minus 1.5, right? I don't hate the minus 1.5 though. Yeah, maybe I'll play a little with that because I feel like because I've got Boston as a better hardpoint team, and if Minnesota's search even regresses just a little bit, right? Like I'm only winning the search 6-5, right? If that regresses a bit, and if they have a bad control, or then they can't pull out um the game 4 hard point to take it to game 5, then yeah, this ends pretty quickly, right? Then like if Minnesota can't win the second hard point, this is suddenly a game. This goes to a game 5. This is a 3-1 Boston, right? So yeah, give me that. Give me Boston on that. I'm in agreement. I think we're in agreement with the values on Boston. If you want to bet on this game, the value is definitely on Boston. Next up, the last game on Friday, the 6 o'clock game, which will probably start about 7 o'clock based on the delays here. Vegas versus Seattle. Vegas plus 1.5 minus 145. Seattle minus 1.5 plus 110. Vegas plus 130 on the money line. Seattle minus 170. This game actually moved a lot. This game opened at, I believe it was like plus 150 or plus 175. Like I remember I swooped in immediately on Friday, or when these lines first came up. They came up earlier I think like either late last week, either like Saturday or Sunday of last week. And then I swooped in then. I grabbed Vegas plus 1.5 at minus 120, and then I grabbed the money line then as well. I really like Vegas here. I've got this basically as a pick, and you're giving me plus 130 on a pick. I'll take the pick any day. I'll take the underdog any day. Over 4.5 is also pretty good here too. I've got that priced. I've got that priced about 40% of the over 4.5, and that's exactly what they've got that line set as. I think Vegas can be competitive with Seattle in the hard point. They're a better search team, and I think eventually they'll pull out a. I think eventually they can pull out a hard point. They may not. Seattle might be better at control, but I think Vegas can eventually pull out a hard point and make this a very competitive match. And if it goes to a game 5, they're the better search team, so they should be able to take out Seattle then. What do you think? And maybe kind of in general expand out on this Seattle team. Like, do you think this was kind of flash in the pan that they got, like, because they came what? They came actually they lost in the finals, right?
Yeah,
Y-
second.
Yeah, they got second. Do you think that was like vastly overperforming expectations? Do you think this is like the number 2 team? Because originally we were low on this team, and that was actually correct because they didn't do well in qualifying, and then somehow they've turned it around, had an amazing weekend, which we've known they've done many times. Like they've had good land weekends this last year, but now we're sitting here and we're like, okay, well now them being good is priced into these markets, and Vegas was like surprisingly not bad, like really surprisingly not bad. So, what are your thoughts on these two teams in terms of that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting matchup. Probably the one I'm most interested in on Friday. Because honestly, the Friday matches, I'm not super excited for anything there. But Vegas Seattle, I think, is going to be pretty intriguing. We have two teams that are vastly different in terms of the game modes that they excel at. Right now, I have Seattle as the number one hardpoint team. They're 12-7 on the year. That's the second best winning percentage. But when you factor in, who they've played, it's it's a gauntlet that they've gone through. Search and Destroy, I have them at 11th, so the complete opposite end, 4-10 in Search. It's just been horrible for them throughout the year. And then Control, they're 7-4. I rank that third overall. So very good respawn team. Vegas on the flip side, all they do is they win search and destroys, and they win matches in map 5, a lot of round 11s as well. That's good. Like, it's good to be a good search team, but yeah, I have them 10th in hardpoint, 11th in control. Their map pool is a little limited, so I do think Seattle should be a sizable favorite, not a huge favorite. um but yeah, just considering what each team is good at. A Seattle 3-1 victory, I'm pretty confident that that is going to happen. I'm not, you know, saying it will, but it lines up so nicely to be a 3-1 victory for Seattle, and you get a plus 110 return on that. I don't mind that at all. Obviously, Seattle had some roster flux with Pred maybe going to Optic, but their team will be intact as it has been for the last year now. So that team's good. Vegas, it's weird because they look all right, right? It's odd to see them like winning matches on a semi-consistent basis. But yeah, they had a good Major One performance. Temp is still good. He's still on the team. He's still looking good. Everybody else on the team is good enough. Prolute's fine. TJ's fine. Clayster looks, obviously better than he did last year. But yeah, these guys are right now search and destroy demons. If Seattle can improve on that a little bit, I do think this series could end quick though. And just of all those game modes, right? We see teams make improvements in search and destroy as the year goes on. So, we saw this with Rocker last year. They excelled at search and destroy early in the season. Teams catch up. Then search and destroy becomes a pretty 50-50 game as we near the end of the season. So, obviously there's still a lot to learn, but I like Seattle. I've always liked Seattle. I was still a little surprised at how well they performed at Major One, but yeah, to me they're still a top four team. And Vegas, I think they're somewhere in the middle. They're maybe seventh, eighth, ninth, maybe somewhere toward the back middle, but I still do think Seattle is at least a tier above Vegas. So I lean Seattle, but the money line's not super interesting, so I'll take the plus 110 that they finish in map 4 or 3.
Yeah, that makes. Oh, so you're on Seattle minus 1.5 then?
Yes,
Yeah.
I just think of all like Vegas is going to finish this in a map 5 because Seattle doesn't know how to play search still, or Seattle just dominates respawn and maybe they figure out search and this ends pretty quickly. So
Mhm. I will say it's kind of interesting, and there is a bit of a thread here. So you've got Clayster having a bit of a resurgence, TJ a little bit as well, and you've also had Priest making a resurgence. And it's interesting that you're seeing, and Scump's obviously performing at a phenomenal level. You're seeing some of the older players. They seem to be doing a lot better this year than they have last year. And to be fair, on now again, generally in pro sports, right? If you have like in football, right? If you have an aging quarterback, it's not getting any better, right? Like, I mean, the big conversation in the NFL this year was kind of Russell Wilson. He finally starting to show his age a little bit and maybe getting a bit older. We'll have to see how he does next year. But again, with some of these guys and Matt Ryan, again, like some of these big NFL quarterbacks, and again, there's been a lot of cases like this. Like Ben Roethlisberger started heading downhill. He retired last year. Drew Brees retired 2 years ago. So with some of these guys, you really once they start declining in terms of arm strength and stuff, that's it. They're gone, right? Eventually. Maybe not that year, but very soon after. But here in Call of Duty, I mean, again, we're dealing with usually people in this sport are very young. The older they get, the kind of, I mean, again, it's terms of reflexes. It's in terms of life, right? Like a lot of them are in their early 20s. They move on. They want to do other things, right? They want to start having families and whatever. So that's fine. A lot of them do retire for that, but a lot of them just they're not as fast as the new younger, twitchier generation, I guess. But we're starting to see that now. Like some of the older players, they're having resurgences. They're doing better, right? We always used to kind of think that, oh, just go get a rookie from challengers, they're better. And to be fair, that definitely is still true. And the next match we're going to talk about that is literally a team that just went down to challengers and just got an entire team. But I think that there is something to be said for the fact that maybe I mean, again, we talked about last year how Vanguard was so fast. Maybe now that we're looking at this, maybe once you slow down the game, maybe that's maybe why the game because the game's accelerated so fast in the last 5, 6 years, etc. Maybe that's why we've seen increasing pressure on some of the older vets like Clayster, Crim6 to retire. And maybe now that this game's kind of a bit slower, maybe some of that pressure might go away. We might see some resurgences from some of those players.
yeah, I buy that. I mean, yeah, just watching this game, you can tell it's slower. The movement is a little nerfed. Yeah, players who just want to fly around and go crazy, you just can't in this game. You'll get punished for that pretty easily. So yeah, to see older players come back and play a more quote unquote traditional COD and do it well, it's nice to see. And yeah, at the same time, we have these teams who are, switching it up with some challengers players because they kind of have to. And yeah, we'll see if that works too. It's a good, well-rounded game because there is an optimal way to play it, and generally that's a little slower pace, a little more team coordination, that kind of thing. But there's still those rooms, or there's still that room on the map in any given map where one player can go crazy. The time to kill is still fast. So if you pick the right route to run, if you pick the right angle to peek, you can make a big play, and we've seen that a number of times. So, but yeah, obviously it's great to see some older players come back, even some players who I remember watching in MW19 come back. They're challengers now, and they're excelling in challengers, and they're going head to head with these current CDL pros and showing that like, hey, like I'm better at this kind of game. Put me on the roster, and we'll jump into LAG here very shortly, and that's a great team to talk about for that specific scenario.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. So that's fascinating storyline we're gonna have to see going forward and see if that holds up for the rest of the year, or maybe that was just a bounce at the beginning and that'll fade back over time. But yeah, that's definitely something to look at. All right. So moving on to Saturday. Saturday, 3 o'clock. Florida versus LAG. Now this is when we start going up against the NFL playoffs. Here, actually, no. Technically, this game is 1 hour before the first wild card game. So technically, they have the stage for this game. Florida versus LAG. LAG, of course, basically unloaded their entire team. They kept Arcides. Everybody else is gone. They basically took up their entire challengers team, added it, and they got rid of Hook. Hook is now with Optic, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, that's the backdrop for this. Florida, of course, is keeping their team, which is questionable potentially. I don't know. I was not the most impressed with this Florida. I mean, they survived the gauntlet. They got to day 3, so power to them. But I don't think that was the most impressive feat ever. But whatever, they're sticking with their team for now, so that's fine. Florida minus 1.5 plus 185. LAG plus 1.5 minus 250. Florida minus 135 at the money line. LAG plus 105. So this is basically treated as even. My model for this surprisingly has about that number. I have Florida is about a 56% favorite, so that would basically puts LAG at plus 127. But again, they seem to have massively upgraded their entire roster, so that's more than I think that's much more than 20 points on that. That's much more worth than that. The 20 points. I mean, this LAG team took FaZe to the wire. They lost a best of 5 to FaZe, right? So like I don't like they lost in game 5 to FaZe. Like this team took a lot of better teams to the wire, and this LEG team almost made brackets, which is basically the first time in because we've had this now 2 years when we have the challengers event. They were almost the first team to make the bracket, and they couldn't pull it off, right? So and them and Elevate both were close this year. Like last year, the only team that was close was Toronto Ultra Academy NA. With Scrappy, they didn't make it. This year now, and actually a lot of people from that team are actually in the CDL now. But basically, they came Elevate and Elevate, which has Gizmo and Harry, former CDL players, and then this um, LEG team. They came close. They just couldn't pull it out at the end. So I kind of think this LEG team is good now. I think this like you put them on this team, you had to let them work with RCDs. I mean, their problem was S&D. I think you give them RCDs and S&D specialists. You let them play in a league a little bit. I think this team could actually be pretty good. So give me LAG here. I grabbed them. I think at 1+110. They're +105 on Bodog. I think they're +110 on Bet365. I kind of like this team. I want to see what this team can do. Um, they're favorites in the hard point. They are underdogs in the search. They're favorites in the control, and then lower favorites in the hard point. But like this team could be pretty good. And this Florida team, I don't think they've shown us anything that basically allows us to think that they're actually a good like they should be favorites. There's nothing that says Florida should be favorites in this game, especially when LAG changes their entire roster. What do you think?
Yeah, Florida is a tough one, man, because right? We go into the year thinking like, okay, this team is probably the worst of the bunch, but they could be interesting. And yeah, Major One I think was a big success for them. They looked all right, but it's almost the same question I had with Boston right after week one of the qualifiers. It's like, okay, this is a team we expected to be maybe in the middle of the pack, maybe back to the pack, and they looked like the best team all of a sudden. Um, will they turn into what we thought they would be, or are they going to keep this up? And yeah, for Florida, this is a weird matchup. I of all the teams to play right away, like I know LA Gorillas have been the worst team in the league so far, but this might be a revitalized group, and I think you might not want to play them in their first, CDL match as a team. So my numbers obviously say take Florida. They're a step above LAG as most every team is, but yeah, I do worry about that roster move. Maybe some energy in the first weekend of their matches, especially against a beatable Mutineers team. I think they'll be talking about that too going into it. We got a young team. Florida's got a team full of guys who have been in the league, some guys who have been challengers, who had good challenger careers, are now on the team. But it's a beatable team, and I think these young LAG guys are gonna salivate at that opportunity, and it could be really, really close. So right now, again, like a lot of the other matches, it's a stay away for me. But I don't know. You could talk me into LAG eventually. I just think the number, like, it wouldn't surprise me if LAG is a favorite by the time we get to match time, just because I think people might talk themselves into it. We got a bunch of young guys. We got Assault coming back. He's been a solid CDL pro. We still have Arcides, who is, Mr. Consistent, good leader. Now you bring in some young guys. It could be a good combination for this team. And, they might go on a little run. I don't think they're a contender, but Florida certainly isn't yet, at least. So yeah, you've got a couple of teams that are still looking to prove themselves, and um, I think there's maybe just a little bit of stock left to buy with LA Gorillas before they might go on a little hot streak that could surprise some people. So for me, it's a stay away, but I think a good game to watch and just see how this LAG team looks and see how this Florida team looks. Does Florida keep up what they've been doing? Right? They obviously had that huge match, two matches versus Optic, where it went wire to, just so close the whole time. Um, yeah, they both these teams are fascinating. That's all I'll say. But I just need to watch and see before I make any wagers.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's yeah, I agree this team could be poised to go on a massive run, and they're we'll talk about their qualifier wins, but yeah, this could be a team that's set to take off here and do really well. I mean, it's weird, right? Because I had actually liked the LAG roster from last year. I liked the core uh of Hook, Neptune, and Asim wasn't on it last year, but then he was now. So I did kind of like that core and um Hook, Neptune, and Spark. Sorry,
Mhm.
I like that core, and now it's just that like it's such a weird position now where I don't know what went wrong, and maybe they didn't give them enough time, but whatever, it's done now. But now they seem to have a really good core here now with this challengers team, so I'm pretty excited to see what they can do, and let's see them in the league. Right, expectations for them are obviously very very low. I mean, I think Florida is still one of the worst teams in the league, despite what I guess the betting markets would imply. What are their odds? Well, what are their odds to win to get the first overall seed? They're the fourth lowest to get the first overall seed. So that's a bit harsh. But I mean, I kind of think that like LG is the lowest to get the number one overall seed. So I really think that this team is being really overridden. And again, even if they were to win this game, which LAG is again the underdogs here, but even if they were to win this game, their stock isn't going to take off. Like when you're watching this game, really closely watch them. Make sure you're watching every single match, every single map. how they play every single game, and make sure you're watching that. And then make sure while you're doing that, you got your finger on an LEG plus 1.5, and then money line bet against Thieves because that's the last game of the weekend. So just make sure you're ready to go with that bet if they do if they look really well, because they might look really good against this Florida team, right? So yeah, we'll have to see. This is probably one of the like this game and the Vegas Surge game. Those are probably the two I'm most intrigued by for this week. So that's probably two of the better ones. So we'll have to see then. All right, next up, Minnesota versus London. Minnesota -1.5 plus 110. London +1.5 -145. Minnesota -200 on the money line. London +150. So this one is interesting. I don't know who to believe here. My model actually surprisingly likes London. I don't know why my model thinks London is a better team. I think they think they're better at search. That's weird. Huh. Well,
I'd
London.
have Yeah, I'd have both these teams are pretty close in hard point in my ranks. But I do have Minnesota as a decent favorite in search and control. But there is a path for London to win, and these two teams play on Friday, so we will see both of them early on. I This one's tough for me though. Again, I don't have strong opinions about either team. Right, the London roster move, Paul X off, Scraps on, right? Maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't. Can Scraps match Paul X's numbers that weren't astronomical, but he was a steady force on that team.
Yeah.
And then Minnesota, what can they do with the same roster they have? I think they're a good team. They should win. And yeah, I don't know. Overall, price wise, -200 feels about right. So I think another stay away from me. But what do you think?
I do have this pretty even. I feel like this is very similar to the Boston game. I feel like I have this basically priced as even. A 3-2 again. I've got this a 38% chance to go over 4.5, so there is value on the over 4.5. That's plus 165, so that there is some value right there. But again, it's not the greatest value ever. It's kind of mediocre, if that makes sense. Like this game is just really iffy. I don't love Minnesota to cover. I'd vaguely take London like plus 1.5 maps, and then maybe the thing you're getting Minnesota is -20 points in the hard point. That seems a little. I have about 30-point favorites, so it seems high, but 30 is about right for this game.
Yeah,
It's
the one thing I will say, right? So London, with my numbers, are the worst search and destroy team so far on the year, despite their 4-6 record. That seems okay. But man, when they lose big.
mhm.
Now you replace a player, you put in a new player. To me, when you make that kind of roster move, search and destroy is probably the hardest thing to pick up right away unless you're picking up just a great search player. And Scraps is like he's a great player, but like could their search get worse? Like they're already at the bottom in terms of
Yeah.
my numbers, but it could in theory get worse versus a Minnesota team that I'm pretty comfortable with in a search. But if you want to take a London plus 1.5, right, you're kind of banking on like I think they'll be good enough in respawn to at least split the first four 2-2, and that's very possible. Minnesota loves to go to Game 5, so if you like London, I much prefer the plus 1.5 to like a money line play just because I think if it does get to them at map 5, I think Minnesota can ice up and finish the job. But yeah, it might be a little bit of a shaky result if it does go to that map 5 and Minnesota wins. I think people are gonna still question Minnesota, like, is this team a contender? Are they not? And obviously, if they lose to this London team, I think people are might go into panic mode a little bit with Rocker, which is probably justified. But yeah, to me, it feels like a Minnesota, just they weasel it out somehow, and it's just not a pretty game. But we'll have to see.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me kind of nail down your opinion on this. So let's say London wins this game, and then let's also say that Boston wins. That Boston beats London, Minnesota, on Friday. Do
Yeah.
you think it's more along the lines of Boston basically coming back from the loss of the M4 and Awakening kind of being sick there, and that's them recovering, and then it's also London coming back, like is their London's team change, having Scraps back in the lineup helping them, or do you think this is a Minnesota problem? What do you think it's? What do you think? What do you think? Like, I mean, obviously, the main story they're gonna like. The thing is, we know the CDL. The main story they're gonna be like, Scraps is back. He's caused them to win. But what do you think is the actual storyline here in terms of
Yeah,
Minnesota?
if they go lose lose, I think it's just proof that this Minnesota team, who we thought might be in the contenders tier of teams, is more like a middle of the pack, like well established middle of the pack, maybe even falling off worse than that. I don't expect them to drop both this weekend. It is possible, but yeah, I don't know. To me, this Minnesota team, it just feels like a lot of the Rocker teams from years past, where it's like they have enough veterans on the team where they're not going to be horrible, but they're going to have an occasional match here or there where they'll lose a game they should win, but maybe they shock a random, they run into phase and they beat them. It's just they're staunchly in the middle of the pack. And London, I think, is not, and Boston, I think, is not quite. So I'd hope Rocker can get 2 wins this weekend, but yeah, I think 1-1 is a pretty likely outcome, and yeah, 0-2, that would be very troublesome. And I think it'd say more about Rocker than those other two teams.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, and we'll have to see. I mean, I don't know what to think of this London team so far, and we'll have to see as we get more pieces about this team. I think it's possible that they're like a middle of the pack team that was able to punch a bit ahead of their weight um, early on in the season. They went 4-1 through qualifiers, but then after the hot 4-0 start, which again, to be fair, one of those wins in that four was against Optic, which was, to put it mildly, disputed. Um, so that's the thing, right? So yeah, that the 4-0 could have the 4-1 could have been closer to a 3-2. At that point, then maybe are you really expecting them to do that well? They got through groups in the major, okay, and then this is kind of where if you think of them as a 3-2 team instead of a 4-1 team, then maybe their results then and maybe potentially the results this weekend kind of make more sense. But again, we need this weekend as a crucial kind of data point in that as well. Next game up on the Saturday later in the afternoon game, Phase versus Surge. Phase minus 1.5 plus 105. Surge minus plus 1.5 plus 135. Phase minus 275 on the money line. Surge plus 195. This is a fascinating one. I do have Phase as a pretty sizable favorite, about a 60-40. So that's not it's a bit lower than expected, but not the worst. Like I don't see much value in Phase minus 1.5. So I guess there'd be value on Surge plus 1.5. Yeah, I got Surge plus 1.5 covering about 66% of the time. So maybe you could go Surge plus 1.5 game five. This game does, but like it's weird though because this rivalry will usually be like one team, like it's two evenly matched teams, but one team will just blow the other team out, and that the team that's gonna probably blow the other team out here is probably more likely FaZe, to be fair, but no real way to know because Surge did take out FaZe in I think the winners finals. Yes, they took them out the winners finals. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched, and there's a long history of one of them beating the other one pretty soundly. Who do you think's got it this? Who do you think's got it this week?
Yeah, Surge. Favorite play so far. At FaZe should not be minus 275 to this team. Surge are on the same tier. I do have FaZe favored. I have them at a 56% chance to win, but that to me should be closer to minus 150 than minus 275. I really, really like Surge plus a map and a half. Obviously, they're hugely volatile when it comes to respawn versus search. The plus 1.5 means, right, just split those respawn, or win 2 out of those 3 respawns. You're good to go. So yeah, I really, really like Surge in the plus 1.5 spot. I don't mind if you want to take a money line, but to me that's pushing it. That means, right, Surge are going to have to way overperform FaZe in those respawn games, or Surge is going to have their search somewhat fixed. And this is a tough opponent. I have FaZe as the number one search team. So, yeah, it's a tough match for Surge, as it always is, but this is a team that they can beat. They have beaten multiple times over the past year. I don't know why the price is this big. It might just be name value, right? FaZe are a good team. They always have been. They had a great major one. Surge had a better major one. So, yeah, to me, don't overthink it. These teams are close. Take the team with the huge price in Seattle Surge.
Yeah, I think that's more than fair. I think you've got yeah, I mean, I agree that it shouldn't be 275. It should probably be closer to plus 150, or minus 150 for FaZe on the money line. So yeah, I think you get 2 to 1 on Surge. I think you take some money line. You take plus 1.5. Let's see, what are some of the spreads here? Surge plus 13.5 in a hard point. It's a little iffy. Surge plus 1.5 in the hard in the search and destroy. That's palatable. That's better. I kind of like that actually. Plus 1.5, minus 110 on map 2. Maybe even the over 9.5 isn't bad either. So yeah, definitely some plays you can make in this game. I think Seattle is an underdog. The thing is, I feel like we're gonna like this game. You're gonna know really quickly, right? Like if I suspect it'll probably be like Surge. It probably is Surge, but to be fair, though, like this, if you'll know immediately, like you'll know by the end of map 1 whether or not Surge is going to cover and win, right? Like if Surge gets an early lead in this map in map 1, and then FaZe comes back and crushes them, then you know how this series is going to go, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've seen it so many times. How many times have we seen Surge have a massive lead in one of these things, only to blow it at the last minute to FaZe, right? So hopefully it won't be that way, but you never can tell with these teams. Last game on Saturday, Thieves versus Subliners. Thieves plus 1.5 minus 205. Subliners minus 1.5 plus 155. Thieves plus 105 on the money line. Subliners minus 135. I absolutely love Subliners here. My model has them with about a 1 second. I've got them at about a 65% chance to win this game, so that's definite value over the minus 135, minus 140 on UC on Bet365. And then my model's got basically subliners covering the minus 1.5 at about a 55% chance. So like, and you're getting plus 150. That sounds awesome. So give me the money line, give me the minus 1.5. Um, you can look at some of these markets too. You could take them minus 10.5 in the hard point. Um, Actually 9.5 on Bodog. You can take them. I love minus 9.5. That's pretty cool too. Lots of different ways you can bet subliners here. This subliners team, we rightfully questioned them, but I actually did jump on them after the group stage. I ended my doubts with them. I really liked them. I really liked what I had seen from them. Grabbed them to make the final and grabbed them to win outright. And I'm still my account is still swimming in green from that, so I'm very happy about that. Um, so yeah, I'm good with that. And it was actually such a great like ride because that cashed, and then I just immediately invested in a bunch of like NFL award futures, and like I grabbed Mahomes at plus 150. So, oh, just like when you parlay winnings into even more winnings. So like I'm sitting on a bunch of Mahomes MVP tickets, so that's great. But yeah, no. So give me subliners here. I think this team is legit. I think this is one of the top 2 teams in the game. Um, when you actually look at when you look on Bet365 qualifier number 1 seed, subliners plus 400. That's actually pretty good value to be the number 1 seed. I have them as one of the better teams. And yeah, I think the subliners team is legit. I think they can take down Thieves. I don't believe in Thieves that much. I think Thieves are a little bit overrated here. What do you think?
Yeah, my numbers are close to yours. I've got subliners at about a 63% chance to win. So yeah, a pretty sizable favorite, which when I punched in those numbers at first, that did surprise me just because, Thieves haven't been bad this year, but New York has just been that good, especially in the last, 2, 3 weeks that they've been playing. So yeah, give me New York. I don't mind the minus 1.5. These teams are pretty close in hardpoint, pretty close in search, but New York's control has been clinical, and a big reason why they won Major One. They're 9-3 overall on the year. If you take out El Asilo, they're 9-1. Um, yeah, that's a tall task for Thieves. Thieves love to play hotel. They're good on it. New York love to play hotel. They're good on it. So maybe control is going to be a little closer than I think. but I still have faith in New York. They've been looking so good every game mode against the top teams in the game, right? Beating FaZe, beating Seattle, beating Toronto. Like, they're great. Thieves, I think maybe, right, part of the price is just baked into the fact that they won champs. They won the last major of the year in Vanguard. This is a much different game, a game that they look good on, but it's not Vanguard. And New York, so far, look amazing. So I do think these teams are a tier apart. Yeah, I have New York and Toronto basically in a tie for top team in the game. Thieves are a contender. They're, fifth, sixth, right in the middle of the pack. So close, but I really like New York here. So if you want to go money line, that's fine. If you want to go -1.5, that's fine. However you want to play New York, I am fine with it because they are that good.
Yeah, I think both are pretty good plays, honestly. I mean, you're only looking at -135 on the money line for New York. That's very affordable, and then you get to sprinkle a little bit on the -1.5. So yeah, I think this like one of the things we had talked about in kind of our first podcast back was how we didn't trust these last year, and then basically just at the end they kind of turned it on, and I think that they just grinded the game enough that they just knew the game better than anybody. And I think that's what caused their success. And I think that now we're back to the same point of this team that has high potential but chronically underachieves. And I think once we get to a point when they eventually probably grind out, like there'll be rumors of like a team change, and then eventually they'll just grind out the game. And then I think then they'll eventually be that top team again. But I think until then, I think we're gonna be sitting here as wanting to fade thieves every chance we can get, and they'll be coming up again later on in a couple minutes here. Ultra versus Mutineers. Ultra -1.5, -115. Florida +1.5, -115. Toronto Ultra on the money line -275, and Florida +200. This is a line I kind of don't understand. I've got Toronto as an 84% chance, 84% favorite here. um, I've got this as a 3-1. I've got a 77% chance of Toronto covering the -1.5. Hal, you've got them a 35% chance of covering the -2.5, which is you're probably getting pretty good numbers. Yeah, you're getting +290. Wow, okay, I'm gonna bet that right now. Well, when you talk, I'm betting that. Um, but no, like this is I don't understand this line at all. I don't understand why this is such a why basically they're saying it's a toss up as to whether or not this ends in 4 or 5. Um, where is this belief in this Florida Mutineers team come from?
Just major one, right? It has to be their major one run. Their close games versus Optic. Like, yeah, they look good at major one, but yeah, this to me, what a nice first week for Toronto, right? You get London in match one. That should be a game they should win fairly comfortably. And then you get Florida on Sunday after they have to play, maybe a really scrappy LAG team. I keep wanting to call them LAG Academy, but they're not. They are the Gorillas now. But in my head, I keep wanting to say Academy because they're basically the Academy team. But yeah, it's a weird weekend for Florida. I just worry they're gonna get surprised by this young LAG team, and then now you have to play Toronto on Sunday, and we know Toronto is great. So
And how many times have we
I
seen that before too, right? Like when it's like, oh yeah, we're playing some team we think we can win, and then it's like, oh man, they look bad, and then all of a sudden they're playing a really good team and they just get absolutely destroyed, right? Like how many times have we seen a 3-0 in that spot?
Yeah, yeah, it's a opportunity there. So yeah, I really do like Toronto as well. I like them even more on the -1.5. I think Toronto's respawn is so much better than Florida's. Florida, kind of like Vegas, have been pretty reliant on their search and destroy performance. But even there, I have Toronto as the better team. So a better in every aspect. I think this is rare for me because a lot of times these Sunday matches, I like to wait at least a day to see one or both of these teams play earlier in the week. But just based on how I think their earlier matches might go, this Toronto number could balloon out to, -300, -350. It could just keep going if Toronto look great against London, which we expect, and Florida maybe a shaky match, maybe a loss to LAG, that'll hurt their stock quite a bit. So I'd rather take the ultra number right now. because I think it's still affordable, especially yeah -1.5 at -115. I've got that covering 68% of the time, so that's well above break even. Um, and yeah, I trust Toronto. This team is very good, and Florida will be scrappy throughout the year, which is funny because they don't have scrappy, but they will. They'll fight throughout the year, and they'll have weeks like they did at Major One where they surprise some people. But yeah, I just think regression to the mean for them, and their mean is a little lower than most. So I'll take Toronto with you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is, I mean, we talk about, I mean, Toronto was one of the most dominant teams in Cold War. Definitely got away from that last year in Vanguard. Again, this game is a lot slower, kind of more similar to Cold War or even Modern Warfare 2019, but probably more similar to Cold War in that case. If this team is able to get back to Cold War Toronto level hardpoint, which to be fair, they were not the best hardpoint team. They were a good hardpoint team. They were not the best hardpoint team, even in Cold War. But if they can get back to Cold War level hardpoint team, then this is when, because remember how many times in that year, like if this was like Florida Toronto in Cold War, this would be we'd be talking about Toronto 3-0, right? We would be it'd be like Toronto -2.5 at like +120 or something, right? Like, but now we're getting at +290, +300, right? So this is the thing. If that hard point is really the only thing keeping us back from Toronto Cold War Toronto, which Toronto, like Cold War Toronto was such a dominant team and almost as dominant as FaZe in terms of their 3-0. Like how many times did we see FaZe 3-0, like 3-0, 3-0 map, 3-0 control, Toronto 3-0 map, 3-0, like those were some of the more two of the most dominant teams we've ever seen in this game. And if Toronto can get their hard point back to where it was in back in Cold War and fix their mistakes from last year, which to be fair, they're getting better. They're probably not at Cold War level in terms of hierarchy yet in term for their hard point, but like they're not that far off. They're a couple of fine-tuned adjustments away from being Cold War level again, and that is a very scary place for Toronto. If you're not Toronto and you've got to play that Toronto team where they can basically crush you in any game mode, they're very good in any game mode. They're one of the top teams in any game mode. Then they just start, because remember they just started eating those smaller teams. It's like we're just better at you in every game mode, and we're just gonna 3-0 you and 3-0 you and 3-0 you, right? So that was those were some of the more dominant Toronto teams, and I think we might be getting back to that this year. I mean, half the team was actually on that team, so we had some replacement players, but yeah, I mean, we could be seeing a return to Cold War Toronto, and that's a very scary thought for the rest of the CDL, I'd say. Um,
Yeah, completely agree. But let's jump into the next game because
yes,
this one is interesting.
this one is interesting. Yeah, so Optic versus Boston. So of course, Optic has made a team change. Optic Dashy is no longer. He is, I guess, a free agent or something. He's sitting
I
around there
think
playing Valorant. I don't.
technically still on their bench
Oh,
because
okay, fair. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think the buyout situation with his contract would just be so much money that he's still technically on Optic, but he's just not gonna play. It's kind of similar to like his situation on OGLA in MW19 where he was on the team, he was a great player on the team, just never started until they needed him at champs, and he went crazy. But yeah, this obviously Optic has a new roster, role changes for some players, right? Illy is going to be the new main AR. We'll see if that's a more comfortable role for him where he can excel. Hook comes in, who has been okay. Like of the LAG players this year, I'd say he's probably second best behind Arcides, but better than Neptune, better than Spart. He's had his moments with right Dallas Empire. We have that Dallas Empire core back with Illy, Hook, and Shotzi. Um, so yeah, a lot of question marks with Optic. Um, but I'm curious, what do you have this at in terms of win probability? Because
Yeah,
I
so
my numbers are shocking.
I got this even.
Yeah, me too. I've got actually Boston. If so, this is the crazy thing, right? If you left the Optic roster as it was with Dashy, and you left the Boston roster as it was, which they're leaving it the same, I have Boston at a 53% favorite, which
Wow.
is shocking to me, but I get it, right? Like Optic just they stumbled and they did get like they played Florida close, a team that we just don't have a lot of faith in. And yeah, now it's a roster move that I have a lot of questions about. I think I lean Boston here, but I wish I had stronger conviction on Boston versus Minnesota earlier in the week, because if I really liked Minnesota in that game, I for sure would wait until the Boston
Hmm.
price gets bigger. But if I really like Boston against Minnesota, then I would take that Boston number. Now I don't have a strong feel about that game, so it might just be a wait and see, maybe a hope Boston lose and then take them on Sunday. But
Yeah, the plus 125 on the money line isn't the most attractive because the plus 1.5 minus 200 is definitely not attractive at all, right? So this is the thing. It's really weird because looking at this, like they clearly try to make a big splash in roster moves, right? We heard about Optic Pred and we heard
yeah,
about RCDs to Optic, and we'll talk about the specific team changes they made in a second because there's a lot of questions to be asked about that alone. But I kind of want to make an interesting point here about getting Pred and RCDs in the first place because like in any other sports league you could trade, like there's trades you can do, right? You can trade draft picks or players or whatever, but here there's only four players, right? Like there's no, again, in MLB, yeah, okay, you only have, I mean, you have nine position players and then you have a bullpen, right? So there's more players, but you've got four players and every single player plays every single game, right? Every single second of every single game. It's not like you have some extra players you can just start moving around, right? I mean, obviously you could have had a trade piece in Dashi and potentially even Illy, but that's assuming they even want them, right? And the other option, basically what was being discussed, was just a buyout. That Optic was just going to buy out Pred's contract and then just basically just buy him out. Same thing as Arcides. And the thing is, normally in football or something, you can trade draft picks, right? Because it basically allows you to give another team something other than just a bag of cash, right? Because the problem is in this league, the only thing teams can win at the end of the year is the only you can just win cash, right? If you're a franchise, sure, you can win titles, those are cool. Everybody loves a trophy and a trophy case, that's fine. But from a financial perspective or a long-term perspective, the only thing you can get from winning is cash, right? You get a cut of the players' winnings, right? You get some cut of that. So at that point, then, if you say you trade Pred for a couple $100,000, whatever, right? You have to factor in, okay, cool, we traded away our best player and we got a bunch of cash back, but then that amount of cash we just lost, gained, definitively hinders our ability to win any more cash. So basically, the price you have to factor in is, okay, well, we're gonna suck now, and we may not even make champs, possibly. I mean, they did pretty well in the first season, so in the first major, so they could potentially make champs. But now they're like, okay, well, we might be bad the rest of the way because we just got rid of our best player. So we'd have to recruit a new Pred. We'd probably have to go find a challengers player somewhere, maybe sub in a couple different ones. So that's a couple contracts you're gonna have to burn immediately. Then you're probably going to be locked out of winning any major tournaments, right? Because you did win a major last year. That was a lot of cash. And you're probably not going to have many great top placements. Maybe you can, but the odds of that, are the expected value of that, are pretty low. So your basic, at most, the trade comes out net even, and they just get Pred, right? They, like, you have the better player. You can grow your fan base, sell merchandise by winning, right? And that's where Pred on your team is more beneficial. So, but the thing is, in other sports league like the NFL, you can trade draft picks, which is basically like, okay, I'm giving you this player so you're better and I'm worse now, but longer term, I can draft a better player that you won't be able to draft, and therefore I can get better than you in the long run, and therefore I can make more money, more merchandise sales, etc. Right? But we don't have that in Call of Duty, right? We only have, here are your four players, which is down from actual five players before. Here's your four players. This is who you have. There's no draft picks. There's no nothing else. You just win money based on how these four people do. And that's a problem for the sport. And this is something that needs to be addressed because it's fundamentally stopping the amount of movement we can see. Like, I mean, the biggest move, I think the biggest Russian move we've ever actually seen was his LAG team, which basically just dumped their main team and signed their entire challengers team. That's the biggest move we've ever seen in competitive Call of Duty. And the fact that we don't have the ability to make trades with draft picks in the future, we have no draft. I mean, you could make Call of Duty, make every single main team have a challenger farm system and then have a draft system coming out of college COD or whatever. Implement something, do something. So there's at least a game within a game, a salary cap, anything. So we at least have something else to talk about and have other ways to facilitate roster moves rather than just, okay, Optic is Optic. We have the most money. We're just gonna go here and buy this player out. To which Seattle said, no. Why are we gonna just give you a player when at most this is maybe we get a couple $100,000 more dollars, but like that's not like long term. That means nothing, right? So that's my rant about the whole Optic Pred situation, and same as Optic RCDs. Um, but my concern about this is this like Scump is mostly an SMG player now because you're adding Hook. Hook is definitely an SMG player. See, Shotzi is an SMG player. Now you're pushing Scump into more AR role. Now maybe he can handle that. That's fine, but that's not the most tested, and that's a bit iffy. And Hook has not been the greatest, right? Hook has been okay. There's been some moments of explosiveness from Hook, but nothing too crazy. Nothing where I'm like, yes, Hook is back to basically modern warfare or even early Cold War form. That's not happening, right? So, like, is Hook definitively better than than Dashi? I can't tell you honestly. I don't know.
No,
Honestly,
the
I
answer
think
is
it's
no.
no. I think
Like
it's a sideways. I think at best this is a sideways move. This is like Hook and Dashi are functionally interchangeable in terms of talent level. This doesn't improve your team. I feel like they just felt the need to do something because this is Scump's last year, and like we have to do something. We failed. We struck out on our first two attempts. We're gonna grab up Hook because he got cut. Like this is the same thing. This is the same complaint we had Minnesota, right? They grabbed two players that Toronto cut, right? It's not like Toronto was like, yes, these guys are great, and like they stole them from Toronto. Toronto said we don't want them on the team anymore. So Minnesota was like, cool, we'll take them, right? So this is the thing, right? Like, I think it's questionable unless you're like a bottom feeder team. Cough, cough. Las Vegas Legion. If your entire strategy is picking up players that have been cut, it's not really good. That's not the greatest. That's not the greatest plan going forward and team building strategy. I don't think. So I think you kind of agree with that. That this is mostly a sideways move, right, rather than an upward one.
yeah, yeah. I think. I mean, Dashi almost won the MVP last year. Like he was Major One MVP, and he almost won season long MVP if Celium didn't go absolutely crazy. So yeah, and I get the whole thing with Dashi. Like there were always those rumors of oh, he was late to practice, he doesn't grind enough, he doesn't communicate well enough, whatever it may be. The thing with him was oh he's always going to put up good numbers, but he's not the best teammate. And it's like okay that very well may be the case, but I don't. Some things you just got to work through, and maybe they have been working through stuff for a long time, and they hit a breaking point finally, and just decided like, Dashi, sorry bud, but like we can't do this anymore. Let's shake things up a lot. Let's have a role change and a roster move. See who we can get. I don't hate the move to get Hook. Like obviously, Pred is better than Hook. I think no one's gonna debate that, but I don't mind trying to like rekindle that Dallas Empire energy that they had. They went on a great year in MW19. Even the start of Cold War, all three of those guys were together with Krim. They were good. Hook since then hasn't been that great. Illy since they won champs hasn't been that great. But if you change up his role, maybe it works. Maybe Hook just teams well with Shotzi as his duo. And yeah, Scump, you're right. Right, he's primarily SMG, but he can play an AR role. Hook can even flex. Like these guys are all pretty comfortable flexing in between weapons, so it could work out. I think it might take a little bit of time for this team to warm up and really hit its groove. But at the end of the day, it's like this team, once they figure it out, is it going to be as good as a team as if they work through the things with Dashi, right? Because it's like, I don't think so. I think we saw the best that they could be with Dashi, and they won Major One last year. They looked dominant for the first month of the season. They were good throughout the rest of the year as well, and that whole team stayed the same, right? Dashi was on that team all year, was great. And yeah, it's fascinating to see the whole Pred situation play out. I'm glad, honestly, not because I don't want Optic to be a good team. I do. I think it's good for the CDL, for COD esports in general, to have a good Optic team that can compete for majors and champs. But if that Pred trade went through, I just think yeah, it would set a very bad precedent moving forward. Of okay, you have this team in Seattle, which the organization as a whole has had financial issues supposedly over the past since they've been in the CDL essentially. Obviously, their first couple years were very poor in terms of placings and whatnot. I believe they had Joey Nubsy, their coach at the time, was also their substitute player because they couldn't afford to, have an extra sub. That was in Cold War. Joey is now a rocker coach. And it's like, okay, if your organization's in that much trouble, could you sell one of the best players in the game to a competing team and get a boatload of cash and just hit the refresh button? And it's like, yeah, you could, but hey, you're a great, like Seattle Surge, you're a great team, right? They brought in Carson in the offseason to be an analyst. They have a good head coaching staff. They were good last year. They look good this year. Like, you're gonna win games. You're very well in contention to win majors, even champs. Like, I'm glad Seattle decided not to go through with it because Optic had other options and they played that out. They got Hook. We'll see if that works. But yeah, it just that precedent of just okay, you're a super org, you have a lot of money, you can just go out and get whoever you want for for essentially there's no downside to it other than it costs a lot of money. But if you have a lot, whatever, like you got money to spend. So yeah, that whole thing is it's a tough thing to navigate around, especially with a league where right there isn't a salary cap. There are limits to your contracts, but it's just there's a lot of stuff to work through, and we'll see if this league adapts to that over the next several years. But yeah, all in all, Optic with Hook, I have questions, especially early on, if this will work. But maybe if it doesn't, maybe a team to buy into moving forward at least. But for this Boston game, ooh, I think I like Boston. So that'll be an ugly start to their major qualifiers if Boston pull out the win.
Yeah, that's very fair. I think if Boston wins this game, do we see Dashi for the major? I think that's a fair question, I guess. I don't know this Optic team. I have no idea what they're doing, and it's gonna be interesting to see what happens from that last match of the weekend. This match is on Sunday night-ish. LAG versus Thieves. LAG plus 1.5 minus 105. Thieves minus 1.5 minus 125. LAG plus 215 on the main line. Thieves minus 310. You got a lot of value here on LAG. You got plus 28.5 on the hard point. Um, basically even to win. Well, plus 1.5 minus 150 in the surge. So basically, the lines favor Thieves by a lot, and they're basically begging you to take LAG here. And I kind of am obliged to, actually. The thing of it is, my model does have LA Thieves as a big favorite here, but I kind of want to see what this LAG team can do. I think this LAG, like, I think if Thieves struggle against New York and LAG beat Florida on Saturday, both those games are on Saturday. I think this line becomes a lot more narrow, and I think you're probably looking at LAG like plus 150 or something. And then, like, the sky's the limit for this LAG team. Like, I know my model says LAG isn't that good compared to LA Thieves, but like, you have a completely new team. My model definitely can't account for that. I think they're a pretty good team. So I'm gonna take this LAG. I'm probably gonna take this LAG team. I'm not sure if I'm gonna bet it yet or not, but I want to see what this LAG team can do. I think there's a pretty high ceiling on this LAG team. Let's just see how high that ceiling actually is.
Yeah, we're in a lot of agreement this week. I don't mind if you just if you want to play the narrative of okay, LAG aren't going to be as bad as they were last qualifier. Just maybe bet both their matches and hope one of them goes through. Obviously, they're more likely to win that Florida match, but this is a Thieves team that is good, not great. Um, so another beatable spot. But yeah, you're right. The way we're talking about how these earlier games might go, right? If we expect New York to take care of business versus Thieves, and we think LAG is going to give Florida a fight, right? This LAG number could, trend the wrong way for us, so it might be best to go now and grab it. But for me, we'll see. I do just because it's the first match back for LAG, that Florida match to me just sticks out like such a good spot to take them. Whereas by the time Sunday night comes around, like, maybe they can roll that into a second win on the weekend and beat Thieves. That would surprise me quite a bit. Yeah, the way I see it, I think LAG shock the world. Well, maybe not shock, but like get a nice upset over Florida early in the week and then come back down to earth on Sunday night against a good Thieves team that should be favored by quite a bit. So a tough one to navigate in that circumstance just because of how we think those earlier matches will go. But I'm not gonna, disagree with you, leaning towards LA Gorillas, even though the numbers might say Thieves are the pick, just because right, this LAG team much different than the one that we just saw a couple weeks ago.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I don't. We're gonna have to see how this LAG team goes. I obviously Thieves are heavy favorites, and they deserve to be. But I think if you start to see this LAG team do some stuff against Florida, like if they beat Florida and LA and Thieves struggle against New York, I think you could definitely this game could be a very competitive game and a great way to end off the weekend. I'd say for sure. Um, okay. Do you want to go over some of the qualifier wins? So again, this is something that is a Bet365 exclusive. So if you don't have Bet365, unfortunately, I do not know a place where you can bet these. Um,
Yeah, let's just fire away at them.
yeah, okay.
What do we got?
So okay, I guess we'll go from the top then. So Atlanta Phase over 3.5 +100 to under 3.5 -138. I've got Phase at about 3.381 expected wins. So it's about even. It's a little less than that. Their games are against Seattle, Minnesota, New York, LAG, and Optic. The problem is you have to worry a little bit about that LAG team. You have to worry about Seattle, and you have to worry about Optic and potentially LAG, depending, right? So I don't love this one. I kind of want to. I don't. This isn't my favorite one. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, sorry. What was the over 3.5?
It's +100.
Yeah, that's a little steep. I think I would lean under their yeah, their schedule is a little on the tough side. I think if you just look at it as a whole, right, Optic maybe not quite as good as what we think they were at the start of the year. LAG might be improving.
And they've got New
I'm
York
sorry,
too.
that yeah, do they play LAG? That
Yep, they play LAG. They play Seattle, Minnesota, New York, LAG, and Optic. So
Okay. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, sorry. So yeah, I have them going over 3.5 about 39% of the time. So the plus 100, I'd need that to be a 50% or better. So it's quite under that. I do think they'll very likely start winners bracket. I've got them at 3.17 wins. 75% chance to get 3 or more wins, which is kind of the number you need to hit to guarantee your winners bracket start. So yeah, Phase will be good. They I think go 3-2 probably most likely, but that would stick to the under. So I'll lean under on them.
Boston over 2.5 +150, under 2.5 -200. They play Minnesota, Optic, Las Vegas, Florida, and Thieves. I've got them at 1.911 wins. So I have them under, but at -200, that's a pretty steep price to pay for that. I don't want to touch that, I don't think.
Yeah, I've got it a little higher. I'm at 2.39 expected wins. Again, somewhat inflated by their 1 week of great M4 performances, but I've got them over 3.5 about 46% of the time. So the plus 150 I think could make some sense there. Again, I just don't know what to think of this Boston team, right? It's hard not to see that they were so much better on that M4 meta. So although I like the over might make some sense, I think it's just a pass for me on them.
Florida Mutineers. You got over 2.5 +150, under 2.5 -200. Florida has games against LAG, Toronto, New York, London, and Boston. I've got them
I'm
at I got them at 1.695 wins. So I take the under, but it's a steep price for the under though.
Yeah, I've got them at 1.98, so right about there, but still under. Yeah, again, like I said earlier, this Florida team looked good, but I think over the course of these next 5 matches, maybe come back down to earth a little bit. I think yeah, a 2-3 or 1-4 finish are probably the most likely.
LAG over 1.5 +110, under 1.5 -150. They play Florida, Thieves, Minnesota, Atlanta, and Toronto. The over 1.5 is actually one of my favorite bets. I've got them at 1.3 wins, but that's not taking into account that they've completely changed their team over. So I mean, they could clear this by we could be sitting here next week and they could have cleared this already. If they beat Florida and then they beat Thieves. So I actually really like this bet. I think LAG over 1.5 is one of my favorite futures here.
Yeah, right. This is a tough team to talk about. I've got them lowest on the board at 0.89 wins, but
Wow.
again, that's all data that works
Hmm.
off of what we have seen so far from them. So yeah, if you embrace that volatility of this new team, like yeah, you could talk into an over 1.5. I would be interested in maybe like I they probably don't exist, but like if there was an over 2.5 with them,
They don't
or
have alt qualifier wins yet. Maybe next year
right,
they'll have alt
maybe in the
qualifier wins.
future,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be something I'd be more interested in, right? Because you have so much change. Embrace volatility, really shoot for the stars with that kind of thing, as opposed to the over 1.5. But yeah, if you are embracing that volatility and you like him to get 2 wins, even though that schedule's a little tricky, um, yeah, I don't mind it whatsoever.
I think we could see them have this cash by next week. I think there's a chance. There's a decent chance I'd say we could see them have this cash by next week, but we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Thieves over 3.5 plus 150. The under is minus 200. Thieves play New York, LAG, Toronto, London, and Boston. I've got them with on average 3.264 wins. Like how I
All
put
right.
right each one to the thousandth, a thousandth decimal
Yeah.
point, a thousandth of a win.
I've just got 2 decimal spots, so I've got them at 3.00. So right on the money with three. Over 3.5, I have them going 31% of the time. So to me, it's an under, but again, not a ton of value on the under as well when you factor in the VIG. But yeah, Thieves should be solid. I think they'll probably get to 3 wins. That's where I've got them pegged at. So um, yeah, just under, but that one could go either way, really.
And that's the thing, right? You don't want to lay a ton on like minus 200, right? Like,
Yeah,
because then
especially
if
with a
they,
team you don't have a ton of conviction with. Like Thieves
yeah.
to me are just they're good, they're solid, but I don't know if they'll go hot or cold or what. So just
Hmm.
a pass. Yeah,
Las Vegas over 2.5 wins plus 200, the biggest on the board. Under 2.5 minus 275. Las Vegas plays Seattle, Boston, London, New York, and Optic. This is one of my favorite ones. Over 2.5. I love the over 2.5.
I'm with you. Yeah, I've got them going over 2.5, 38% of the time. You said over was plus 200, so the
Yeah.
break even's 33%. So there's, yeah, about a 5% edge there for me. Yeah, schedule's not too tough, especially if you think Optic are what they were or worse than they were last stage. So, yeah, Vegas over. I did not think I'd say that going into this year.
Did not think I'd be betting
Go
many
with it.
Vegas overs or many Vegas numbers at all this year. I mean, we literally had a thing where if we called them the wrong city, we'd have to bet on them as some sort of perverse punishment.
Right.
But now that's actually like, yeah, I want to bet on Vegas every week now. I want to bet the money line. So we're not even shying away from betting on Vegas. Okay. Next up, London Royal Ravens over 1.5 minus 138, under 1.5 plus 100. I've got London plays Toronto, Minnesota, Thieves, Vegas, and Florida. I've got London at about 1.99 wins. I'm staying away from this. This is not. I mean, there is probably value on the over 1.5, but not much. Like I'm staying away. I don't want to be any part in this.
Yeah, I've got them at 1.54, so I'm a little lower than you, but I don't mind it. I think I wouldn't be too shied away from London. They're, I don't know, a team that I think will stay close to the bottom throughout the year, but maybe with a team change they can catch some heat and win some games, but yeah, this is a stay away for me, but I don't know. If I had to lean, I'd probably lean over as well.
That's fair. Minnesota over 2.5 minus 150, under 2.5 plus 110. Minnesota's got Boston, London, FaZe, LAG, and then Seattle. I've got them at 2.02, 2.002 wins. So technically the under is in play, but it's not my favorite under. I don't really love it that much. I'm probably not going to play it at all, to be honest with you. But yeah, I don't really like this. I'm staying away from this one.
Yeah, fair enough. We're This is probably the biggest discrepancy so far. I've got Minnesota at 2.89
Wow.
overall wins. So I think their over might have a little bit of value. I have them over 2.5, 65% of the time. And the minus 150 has a 60% break even. So a little bit of an edge there. But again, Minnesota not a team I'm super, just they're like thieves to me, right? They're solid, but they're not trending. I mean, they're trending down if anything. So yeah, a little shaky for me there. But hey, if they can start in winners bracket, I'll be happy. So
Yeah, that's fair, I guess. There's other ones I like better than that though. So this is one I like actually. Subliners. Over 3.5 plus 175, under 3.5 minus 250. New York plays Thieves, Florida, FaZe, Vegas, and Seattle. Absolutely love the over 3.5. Give me that. The plus 175 there. I've got them at 3.84 wins. I think they can definitely get to 4 wins. I actually have them as the highest win total. Very close to Toronto, the team a couple more down from now. But give me the over 3.5. I especially with a plus 175 price. I love that number. You can't beat that number.
yeah, I'm with you. I have New York with the second highest expected wins, only behind Toronto. There's actually a pretty sizable gap. We'll talk about Toronto in a bit, but their schedule is nice. New York, I've got at 3.47 wins, which at first glance is less than 3.5. But once you run the probabilities, I've got them winning 4 or 5 games 51% of the time. So it should be a very good stage for them if they just continue what they've been doing. So yeah, plus you said plus 175 to go
Yeah.
over. Yeah, that's phenomenal. I love that. So honestly, if I'm not just taking them in their head to head matches, like just take that over. That's phenomenal. Yeah, love it. Love it.
Mhm. Optic. Over 2.5 minus 125, under 2.5 minus 110. I feel like this is literally the books being like, we have literally no idea what's going to happen. We have no
Yeah,
clue. They play Boston, Seattle, Toronto, Vegas, and FaZe. That's actually one of the tougher schedules.
that's a
Uh,
gauntlet.
it
Yeah,
is. And this is the thing, right? I mean, I remember looking after their major one, and I'm like, oh, they're gonna make team changes. I'm like, oh, maybe they might have a better major two. And I looked at their schedule. I'm like, oh my god, that's not a. I mean, they're playing at least two of the top teams in the game, plus Vegas, plus Seattle, a team that was in the finals, right? They're playing like potentially three of the top four teams in the league. Like that's not good.
yeah.
I've got my win total set for them as 1.3. So
Woo! I've got them at 1.8. That's third lowest. So to me, a loser's bracket start is not out of the question. Um, yeah, I have them going 3 or more wins about a quarter of the time. So to me, it's an under. I have them as underdogs right now in all of their matches. Slight underdogs in a couple of those, but still, yeah. And if you think who might take some time to get this team gelled, like yeah, it could be a 1-4, 2-3 stage for Optic, which is yeah a little bit of a shock just because we were so high on them going into the year. But obviously a lot has changed, and yeah, we'll see if they can prove us wrong. But I'm with you on a probable under there.
yeah. Second from last, Seattle over 2.5 plus 100, under 2.5 minus 138. Seattle plays Vegas, FaZe, Optic, New York, and Minnesota. I don't hate this one. I've got them at 2.7 wins. I don't love the plus 100 though. I wish that number was better. But I'm not. That doesn't necessarily stop me from taking it. I might still take that. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, we're pretty close there. I've got them at 2.65, right along with your number. Over three, or I'm sorry, over 2.5 wins 56% of the time. So that's better than plus 100. So yeah, and I always love Surge. So over on them. Let's go.
All right. Well, they have Pred. They've kept Pred now, so that's half the battle right there.
Right, right.
Toronto Ultra here. Over 3.5 minus 110, under 3.5 minus 125. Toronto sneakily having one of the easier schedules of this major. London, they play London, Florida, Thieves, Optic, and LAG. There's like,
Cakewalk.
yeah, this is one of my. I've got them at 3.772 wins. I hammered this over. Absolutely
Yeah,
love this. Non-zero chance Toronto goes 5-0 here, straight up. Uh,
yeah. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this is the thing. Yeah, I think we're both in agreement on that. What? How many?
Yeah.
How many wins do you
this
have?
is this is a huge difference. I said New York was 347, 3.47. Toronto is at 4.04.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a super easy schedule. I've got them over 3.5 about 76% of the time. So a minus 110 is nothing. Yeah, to me, 4 wins, very likely. I've got that the most likely outcome. So I think 4-1 very likely, yeah, in a perfect 5-0, I've got happening a third of the time. So, um, basically a lock to start in winners bracket. Very, very likely to have the top seed, if not the top one of the top two or three. Um, but yeah, a really, really nice schedule for a great team that just adds up to a lot of wins.
We're sure they're not hosting this major? Are they hosting major two?
Oh, true. We didn't think of that. Yeah,
No,
wait,
no, they're not.
Boston
It's
should have
Boston.
like
It's
a
Boston. Yeah.
yeah.
No, they stopped
Well,
doing that this year because the thing was, if you remember, the reason they did that last year was because originally it was supposed to only be the top eight, so they wanted to make sure that the top eight hadn't that the host had an easier path because if not, they had that insane tiebreaker thing. And then after
right,
Backlash, they just got rid of it, but then they couldn't change the schedule because they're like, well, no, we made the schedule. It was definitely not tampered with in any way. So
right,
they had
right.
to keep that.
Yeah.
So no, so that weirdly for Toronto, weirdly my model has Toronto and Thieves as a toss up, and I don't know why. It's weird. Like Toronto should be favored in every game, but that one's like a pick, and that's I think why mine is a little lower than yours. But still though pretty high. Okay, I'm gonna just quickly read off the qualifier number one seed futures here. And see, there's a couple ones that I think are some value here. Toronto plus 250, they're the highest, which makes a lot of sense. I think people probably don't understand why they're the highest. And when you see the schedule, it makes sense. Phase plus 275, that's horrible.
No,
Thieves,
yeah, pass,
Thieves plus 350, no.
pass.
Subliners plus 400, it's actually kind of tempting.
Yeah, I'd just maybe double up Toronto and New York. Those are the highest in our models
Hmm.
and by quite a bit, it sounds like. So, yeah.
Minnesota 12 to 1, Surge 14 to 1, Optic 16 to 1, Boston
No.
50 to 1, Florida 66 to 1, Vegas 80 to 1, Ravens 100 to 1, and then LAG, which is kind of interesting, 150 to 1. I feel like it's worth
Yeah.
it just to
I
sprinkle a little on that one.
maybe we were talking about volatility earlier, like instead of going over 1.5, I don't know, maybe go crazy and take that instead,
Why,
but
why not both?
um yeah, I'm not. It sounds like you're a little higher on the LAG roster change than I am. I like it too. It's kind of a move they had to make, but of those bigger numbers, I think I'd lean. I mean, I don't have a strong opinion about a lot of those teams, but Boston, you said was 50 to 1.
Hmm.
Yeah, I got them in the middle of the pack, so I could see it happening maybe, but I don't have them as huge underdogs really in any of their games. If they can turn things around, and it's a big price, right? Because they've looked so bad lately. So that might be one I would talk myself into. But yeah, otherwise, Toronto and New York, I think, are the best for sure.
Yeah, I think so. So that does it for us for this week. Excited to have Call of Duty. We're recording this on Wednesday night. We're just 2 days away from Call of Duty again. Very exciting. And look, we've had some great games so far this year. Games that matter, control games that were not horrible. It's been a pretty
Yes.
good. It was a good 3 weeks already, and we've got a whole year left. We're on this train until June. So sit tight, everybody. Sit back, get a drink, and watch some Call of Duty with us. And we will see you here next week to discuss next week's games and whatever happens here with Optic and LAG and all this. It's going to be an exciting week. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week. See you guys.